here's the rules. It's same as you just watched. 4-minute openings, answers are 3-minute one. Go for it.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Chopp. I appreciate everybody being here tonight. I have run for the legislature for many years in order to get things done. I'll give you 3 examples just this year of things that we were able to accomplish. And then I want to talk a little bit about my service to this very neighborhood where I worked for about 20 years. First of all, we passed the Jobs Now Act, which is a $1.3 billion capital construction projects all across the state, creating 22,000 jobs across the state, which addresses one of the major concerns that the people of our state have, which is unemployment and underemployment. We passed the Jobs Now Act. Second of all, we expanded health care for all. We want to make sure that every person in this society has health care. We expanded Apple Health for all kids by expanding the outreach efforts to get from about 97% coverage of kids to as much as 100% of coverage in the state. Over 750,000 children right now are on the Apple Health program, which I started a few years ago, and we've expanded step by step to make sure it's a universal system for all kids, and then it covers everybody. About half the people in the state, half the young people are covered with Apple Health, and we feel very strongly proud of that, in part because it's aligned with the basic health plan, which we also worked hard to preserve in order to be the fundamental basis for the expansion of Medicaid, which over the next 2 years, hopefully if Obama is reelected, we'll be able to expand health care for about 300,000 more adults in the society, going towards the goal of 100% coverage for everybody. Third goal that we achieved was marriage equality. This was not easy. It involved a lot of effort to create a constructive majority in the legislature. Had we not had that majority, marriage equality would never have come to the floor for a vote. Well, we got the votes across the state to put on the floor. We were the first state in the nation, to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act. That's called DOMA. First in the nation. We also were very proud of our efforts when we passed civil unions that it got sustained by the people of this state. But this year, this election is extremely close. Please do whatever you can to make sure that marriage equality is affirmed by the voters this fall. Now, getting to my service in this community, I used to be the executive director of the Fremont Public Association. I served in this community for over 20 years. Let me give you a few examples of what I did. First, as executive director of the Fremont Public Association, one of the things that we actually started several years ago was the Fremont Street Fair, one of the best street fairs in the country as far as I'm concerned. But also beyond that, we did a lot to rejuvenate the community. If you had seen this community 30 years ago compared to what it is today, you would have been amazed at how much change there is. And so we did a lot of things, including even ranging from the arts projects, the Waiting for the River, the sculpture that's down the corner there. I was the project manager for that, raised the funding for that. But more importantly, we did other things to save the neighborhood. I wrote the grant and got it saved, which is the Fremont building just down the street, to make sure that that was preserved, because it was very important to have historic preservation. But more importantly, there were 2 things that we did as community organizations. Just across the street here, where my offices used to be, we used to have a food bank. It was at that site that we started the initiative to raise the minimum wage in this state, and to have it not only be at the highest level in the nation for a minimum wage, but also to tie it to the cost of living. That started in my food bank across the street. We were able to get 68% of the public to support that. Secondly, just a block over that way, we started a Fremont recycling station. How many of you do curbside recycling? Yeah, it started right there, a block away, by the Fremont recycling station #1, with Arminster and Napoleon Stefani. So we looked both at the small level to save this neighborhood, rejuvenate it, but looked at major social issues to do the right thing for the people of the state.
Thank you all. I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak to you all. It's indeed an honor. There are several points I want to bring up, but I have only 4 minutes, so I will have to pick and choose. But I first want to respond to some of the points that came up. We're looking at a whole era of massive budget cuts, where only since 2008 $10.5 billion have been cut from education and healthcare. I'm a teacher. I'm looking at the cost of higher education almost doubling in this entire state. So I think the Speaker and the Democratic Party and the leadership in Olympia has to have an answer for this. I mean, why is this happening when we are living in one of the wealthiest states in the country? And this is the wealthiest country in the world. The reality is that this is the state with the most regressive tax system in the entire nation, and that is where the answer lies. The answer is not that we have no money. The answer is that the money is not with us, but with multinational corporations and the super rich. And the Democrats and Republicans in Olympia are serving their corporate masters and not serving us, and that is why we are in this situation. And just very quickly, the Speaker mentioned the Jobs Now Act. Of course, our campaign, we are socialists. We are standing for unionized living wage jobs for everybody. So, of course, we support any action for jobs. But I think it's extremely important to remember that the Jobs Now Act, as it stands now, is being funded by some of the most regressive taxes yet again. The 520 toll and a 50-cent tax on gasoline. That is like taking money from the poor and then giving a little bit of it back. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about taxing the super rich, taxing the big corporations that can easily generate 10 times the amount of money that is necessary to cover all the cuts, reverse all the cuts that happen, and then leave some more. The Speaker and the Democrats often talk about assembling votes. We need a majority, we need to assemble votes, we need to get things done. But in reality, what they mean by getting things done is, further being able to carry out the corporate agenda and giving us some crumbs. I want to give you some examples. They often talk about not having a supermajority and blaming Tim Eyman. Of course, we're socialists, so we're from the opposite end of the spectrum from Tim Eyman. We know how awful and horrendous his ideas are. But the reason that is working in Olympia is because neither the Democrats nor the Republicans are going to stand up against it. And a very small example. And a very small example, but a very telling example I can give you, is that in 2008, the Democrats in the state, like in many other states, rode the Obama mania wave and did get a supermajority. And what did they do? They actually carried out, with even greater vehemence, their good old regressive taxation and corporate and anti-worker agenda. In fact, an article from the Seattle PI says that after coming in like a lion, the 2009 legislature went out like a lamb. And this is a quote from the Building Industries Association, which is one of the slimiest and most notorious corporate consortium, which has lobbied massively against anything from homeowner rights to climate change. So I think that is a very telling thing. And another quote I can tell you from the same period, they had the supermajority in the House and the Senate, and it says the list of disappointments is lengthy. The Democratic leadership has tabled or thwarted a number of no-brainer legislative items, like bill to keep tabs on corporate tax breaks, legislation to prevent employers from holding captive audience anti-unionized meetings. This is a very important one because this really angered the labor leadership, and actually when they expressed their anger, Speaker Chopp actually was one of the people who called the state patrol on them. Kshama Sawant.
Okay, we're going to do a round of 3 minutes questions and 1 for response. And the first question for you, Mr. Chopp, is the stranger said upon endorsing your opponent that you have presided over the last decade's devastating cuts to colleges. How do you respond to that accusation?
Well, I led the effort to raise significant resources in this state. In an election year in 2010, we suspended Eyman's initiative to enable us to raise revenue with just a simple majority. With that, we raised $3 billion in new revenue, including tax loopholes that were closed on banks and Wall Street and things like that. $3 billion saved a hell of a lot of programs, including education and higher ed. In terms of higher ed, we actually increased the student financial aid, the state need grant, by 25% 2 years ago.
How much did tuition go up?
Well, I think that it's very important that if you're wealthy, you ought to pay more for your sibling or your offspring's education, because we don't have an income tax. This system is very aggressive, and we need to do what we can to level it out. Having wealthier families pay a higher tuition for their kids is the right thing to do, and use the tax dollars to help the low-income people and the middle-income people achieve that. That's what we stand for. Also, I could go on and on about those sources, but one of the most progressive things we did in terms of revenue was I led the effort to reinstate what the Republicans call the death tax, which is the estate tax. That's a 19% tax on wealthy estates dedicated to higher education. That brings in about $300 million premium for higher education. I've been working with a whole group of folks for the last several months now to come up with the next wave of things we need to do for higher education.
I think, as we have posed this question several times to the Democrats and the Speaker, it's really puzzling what their definition of saving something is, because if the tuition for higher ed is gone up by nearly 100%, I'm not sure you can, by any reasonable stretch of the imagination, call that saving. And let's be clear, these massive and brutal increases in tuition are not affecting the wealthy, because they do have the money anyway to pay for it. So even if the cost went 3 times or 5 times up, they're still able to pay. But those are not the people we are talking about. The super wealthy are just a small sliver at the top. Everybody else is at the bottom, and varying shades of middle class, lower middle class. But the census numbers are showing the middle class is disappearing into poverty. The poor are sinking deeper into poverty. One really good example is 43% of the students at Evergreen State College are now officially in poverty, and they're actually asking campus security where can they park their cars safely, because that's where they live, in their cars.
So, question for you. Speaker Chopp has been instrumental in keeping the Democratic Party organized for electoral victories in the state legislature, helping prevent an even more aggressive Republican takeover in either the House or the Senate. How would replacing him with you affect those efforts?
So first of all, the question whether the Democrats and Speaker Chopp have been instrumental in actually staving off the Republican agenda is highly questionable, because I think what is really happening is that both Democrats and Republicans are serving the corporate agenda, which is the Republican agenda. The difference between the Republicans and the Democrats is that the Republicans, very clearly in progressive people's eyes, are very pro-big business, pro-super wealthy. But what the Democrats do is that they pay lip service to those questions, but actually ultimately carry out the same agenda. And the example that I provided about the supermajority is a very clear example. I mean, they're always talking about assembling the votes and garnering the support. But Speaker Chopp has been the speaker for 10 years. He has the support because he's voted in as a speaker for 10 years. He has more than enough support to carry out whatever agenda he wants to carry out. He controls the House Rules Committee. He controls the House Democratic caucus. He has the power to decide which bills see the light of day in the legislature. So I really cannot accept that excuse that somehow this is by voting for Democrats it's going to be beneficial for us. And I'll give you one example, yet another example of that. In terms of education, in between 2000 and 2003, there were a couple of very, very remarkable and very important school initiatives, ballot initiatives that came in with historic majority. Initiative 732 and Initiative 728. One was to reduce class sizes, and the other was to improve teacher salaries by giving them cost of living increases. This had a historic majority. What do you expect to happen in a democracy when the vast majority of the people want something? The Democrats could have pushed that through because they had the voter mandate. But what they did was that they told the teachers, who were demonstrating in Olympia, that, well, we don't have money to give you, and Speaker Chopp was the speaker at that time, but then they turned around and gave the $3.2 billion, which should have been allocated to these bills, to Boeing in the name of job creation. And in reality, on the balance, we lost tens of thousands of jobs because Boeing was going to move its jobs anyway, and that is why I'm a socialist, because we are living with a capitalist agenda. The Democrats and Republicans are just incidental to this agenda. They are tools to carry out that corporate agenda, and if we want to break out from this insane logic of more and more budget cuts, deeper and deeper poverty, which is what is staring us in the face, then we have to break from that entirely. We have to break from this lesser evil logic and realize that they are the more effective evil, and break from evil entirely and start talking about grassroots campaigns. And we are hoping that our campaign can be the building blocks for what we hope will be a new mass political alternative to the Democrats and Republicans.
Say a number of things. You covered numbers of the topics there. First of all, we've never had even close to a supermajority in the legislature. Supermajority is 2/3. We've never had close to that. But more importantly, we have fought corporate interests repeatedly. Let me give you a few examples. We fought the drug companies and created a purchasing pool so that the state had purchasing power to buy prescription drugs at much lower cost. The drug companies were horribly against it. They are funding campaigns against us right now, places like Cal, etc. We fought back. We enacted a purchasing pool to use the power of a collective effort to make sure we got cheaper drug prices. Second of all, we passed the Fair Insurance Conduct Act, the Insurance Fair Conduct Act, which the insurance companies hate because it basically says that if you have a legitimate claim for your insurance benefit, you are required to get paid by the insurance company, and if they resist you, they have triple damages, which gives the consumer a lot of power dealing with the insurance companies. The biggest funder of the Republican Party now is the insurance companies, and I'm running out of time, so I can keep going, but
well,
I think that's...
you get to respond as you wish to the next question, which continues the tax issue. How do you get income tax on the table?
Well, I got it on the table. I started the organization called the Economic Opportunity Institute many years ago. I hired John Burbank to run that. It started actually at the Fremont Public Association, the organization I was executive director. We spun that off to make sure that they were independent and were able to move forward on a progressive agenda. They passed a number of things over the years, including their help on raising the minimum wage to the best level in the state of Washington. They also were behind Initiative 1098, which was on the ballot 2 years ago, which was probably not the best year to have it because there was a Republican wave across the country. That did not pass then, but that was an effort that grew out of the work I did to start the Economic Opportunity Institute. And that is a clear example where I've actually put my life on the line for these causes, but did it in a way that is organizing the community to generate support for that. We had a lot of support from a lot of people, but at that particular time didn't pass. We need a much fairer, much less regressive tax system in the state, and I'm dedicated to work towards that goal.
Sure. I wanted to say that this idea that the Democrats did not have a supermajority is not true. They did have a short time of supermajority, but that is, actually, in my opinion, somewhat beside the point. I mean, we can, even if hypothetically they did not have it, that is not the point. The point is, when you're being elected as a public servant with a mandate of representing the interests of ordinary people, what are you actually doing for it? How are you actually representing their interests? Are you saying that you're representing their interests by hobnobbing with the corporate types and going to dinner with them and primarily representing their interests and giving us a little bit of little bit of crumbs, as I said, and is that what you call governing democracy? Or would you do what I would do, which is, if I were elected, I would be saying exactly the same thing I'm saying now. I would be shouting from the rooftops that we need progressive taxation, we need to tax the profits of Microsoft and other corporations, and when did they ever fight for 1098? We were out on the streets as a small group fighting for 1098. We never saw a single Democrat out there holding a town hall to support 1098.
I've been on the streets for 1098. We advocated for it. We pushed some extra research themselves, as well as a lot of labor support. My God, I was out there fighting for that thing repeatedly, including starting the organization that actually proposed it.
Because he got time, the moderator is giving me time too. I wanted to say that one thing is, I know Speaker Chopp is saying that was not the best year. When we interviewed with a stranger, he said that. But even recently, he said that this is not the best year. So when is it going to be the best year to fight, to actually really fight for a progressive tax? That's my question. And the other point is that 1098 did not fail because people voted against their interests. 1098 failed because people rationally voted for their interests, because they are realizing that every time the Democrats push for a tax, it always falls on the backs of ordinary people. You know, it's always a regressive tax. So why should they vote for it? So they have to have a record of progressive taxation in order to convince people that a tax increase is actually in the favor of ordinary people.
So to continue on the theme of revenue, if you were elected, you speak, the preface is, your positions talk about lots of good things like a ride-free zone all over King County, and other public expenditure requirement measures. How do you propose to actually raise the revenue to get there?
I think the ideas for raising revenue are not really a mystery. I mean, we are often told that we need great ideas. Of course, we need great ideas, but the great ideas are out there. Actually, the Economic Opportunity Institute, which Mr. Chopp mentioned, they have fantastic ideas. I invite the Democrats to adopt at least one of their 100 different fantastic ideas for raising taxes such that it benefits ordinary people. I'll tell you why it is not happening. It is not happening because it is a zero-sum game. The money has to come from somewhere. All the money, most of it, because of the system we are living in, is siphoned off by the super wealthy and big corporations. So in order to actually fund education, fund public transit, as you asked, we have to actually take on corporate interests. We have to take them head on. We have to fight corporate interests, not try to do some wheeling and dealing and get a little bit of, squeeze a little bit out of it. But in order to go head on against corporations, you have to be perfectly clear what your agenda is. If you're a career politician who is trying to make deals and coalitions with business interests, that is not going to work. And that is why it's going to be different if a grassroots campaign or a socialist gets into Olympia, because we are not going to be doing that. We are not taking a cent from corporations. We are not interested in making a lucrative career for ourselves. Instead, what we will be doing is pointing out the reality that every time a progressive change has happened, whether it was a progressive tax or minimum wage or the 8-hour work day or funding for public education or the creation of community colleges, whatever you want to talk about, none of these progressive changes has happened without mass movements on the streets, putting pressure on the corporate politicians to actually carry out an agenda for the working class. And our campaign is not in service of corporations, but in service of the mass movements and the working class that we represent, and we will be taking that voice out there in Olympia and calling on people to join the struggle to not only create a mass political alternative, but to put a lot of pressure in order to gain those concessions in the form of progressive taxes and funding for public education. It can be done. It is totally doable. But for that, you have to have the moral clarity and a fire in your belly to actually fight for the working class. And I'll stop there.
Well, the first thing you said was that I didn't work with the Economic Opportunity Institute. That is absolutely not true. I worked with them on 3 specific ideas that took on corporate interests. There were 2 tax loopholes that we closed on Wall Street banks, one dealing with the Nexus issue, another one dealing with the B&O tax rate. We repealed both of those, which are resulting in about $250 million of new revenue to the state. Those are developed by EOI, Economic Opportunity Institute. We implemented. We also worked closely with them on the estate tax, the 19% tax on the wealthy, and we also worked with them about a strategy, a grassroots strategy that would actually succeed statewide. So we not only passed in Olympia, but then we made sure that it was linked and dedicated to the Education Legacy Trust Fund, because we knew that Hyman and others would come back and try to repeal it through a referendum. That's what they tried, but because of our organizing effort at the grassroots level, in community meetings throughout the state, we won that battle with 61% of the vote. That's the kind of real world experience that I bring to this job.
Anybody has a 30-second?
Thanks for that applause, by the way.
Question, no speech.
Yeah, in 2010, Mr. Chopp, you mentioned that you suspended, that you took the vote, suspended the rules in order to institute some extra taxes for education. Since you had the votes to suspend the rules and institute them, why didn't you do a progressive tax then?
We did several other things in that was very progressive, but that was the 1 year out of about 7 or 8 that we could actually suspend Hyman's initiative. It wasn't suspending the rules, it was suspending his initiative, which requires 2/3 vote in the legislature to raise taxes. We suspended it with 52 votes. We then proceeded to close several tax loopholes on Wall Street banks. We also raised other corporate taxes, namely the business occupation tax and professional services, which totaled up about $650 million. So you start adding all that up, it clearly was designed to make sure that the tax system was more fair and was actually productive for the services we cared for. So we did that exactly the way I just said.
Yes.
So the answer to that question, why doesn't the speaker, why don't the Democrats, exercise that kind of authority, which they have legally, in order to carry out a real progressive tax? The answer is the same, and the answer is that in order to actually carry out that, they have to take corporations on, but they're not willing to do that. They're not willing to actually say that in order to actually provide funding for education and social service, you have to repeal the more than 500 tax exemptions that big business has been given. You have to take into account the fact that the Seattle metropolitan area is the 10th largest concentration of super wealthy households, meaning households that have more than $30 million. I mean, look at the difference. Here you have households that own millions of dollars of wealth, and here you have on the other side hundreds of thousands of households struggling to pay their rent or struggling to pay their mortgage and not get homeless. So the question is, which side are you going to represent? And I think we have to challenge this idea that you can keep both of them happy. That is not possible. I can tell you that as a socialist, that is not possible. You have to choose which side you're going to represent and decide if you're going to go after the money. And as far as 1098 is concerned, I mean, the Democrats are famous to say that, well, the voters spoke, we couldn't do it. You know what? The voters spoke many other times when they rejected the privatization of workers' comp and so on. There are other examples. But in those times when it was going to benefit corporations, the Democrats had no problems going against voter interests.
Oh, wait a second. We fought against the privatization of workers' comp repeatedly. That was one of the worst ideas ever proposed in this state, was to privatize the worker comp system. And we fought vigorously against it and defeated that effort. That was on the ballot. It was polling at a majority vote. We fought against it and defeated it by over 60% to defeat the privatization of worker comp.
I will entertain a question, but it has to be for this one. No? Yeah?
Well, it's going to be for both?
Yes, but it starts here.
Okay. Well, I recently, so there was a press release that went out with some serious allegations from the Swamp campaign about Speaker Chopp's, and this is the Swamp, candidate Swamp who sent out this press release, about Speaker Chopp's ties to the BIAW. There was minutes that were sent out from a whistleblower of a board of directors meeting, of the BIAW, which Speaker Chopp spoke at, congratulating them on their working together successfully on their legislative agenda, including killing homeowners' rights. And the other question that's related to that is the workers' comp system. There's been an ongoing scandal that sort of everyone in Olympia knows about, but hasn't been openly discussed, is about $225 million, which is raided out of the workers' comp system and handed over in excess to big corporations. When is there going to be an investigation about that, or can you explain from your campaign's point of view what you're raising about this And when is that money going to be recovered if we have a deficit?
Yes, I think that is a very important point to bring up. I don't think that is completely an isolated instance either, but this is something that a volunteer or whistleblower has given information about, and I won't go into too much detail about how that happened, but basically there was a rebate workers' comp system which works in such a way that if the corporations end up not spending on workers' comp, then they get a rebate. But what has happened for over 10 years is that the amount of rebates that have gone to these corporations are millions of dollars above and beyond what should have been given to them. And we have estimated very conservatively that it's about 225 million, and we suspect it is much greater than that. And the Democrats have said repeatedly that this is done, it's in the past, but I have a couple of questions. One is that even if it was in the past, it was during Speaker Chopp's tenure as a legislator and as a speaker. How is it that such a big scandal wasn't taken up with a serious investigation? And I put emphasis on serious because I know Speaker Chopp will say that there was investigation. But I can tell you this, in a time when ordinary people are being told there's not even a few $1 million for your needs, how can the legislature let this slide? There should be a hue and cry about this type of taking away of taxpayer funds that is not accounted for. And they say it's an accounting error, but so be it. If it was an accounting error, was that money put back into the system? Why wasn't it? Why are they not fighting to get that money back from corporations, instead putting all that burden on ordinary people? And I also want to highlight that one of the prime beneficiaries of this whole so-called accounting error is the Building and Industries Association of Washington, which I mentioned previously. And I think very credible sources, mainstream sources have pointed out the close ties of the Democrats along with the Republicans, and specifically Speaker Chopp, with this consortium. In fact, the president of this consortium famously recently said that we have friends on both sides of the aisle, meaning both Democrats and Republicans. It doesn't matter who has the majority. We have lobbyists to control them. This is what they're saying. And at a board of directors meeting of BAIW, when they were actually doing cartwheels, that they were able to defeat 12 of 14 legislations, which were, those legislations were going to be in favor of ordinary people and workers, and hence it was, antagonistic to super business interests. They were able to defeat 12 of those 14, and they were crowing about that at that meeting. At that meeting, Speaker Chopp was a special guest, and I think the Vice President also famously said that I would like to see Speaker Chopp become the governor. Now the question here I have is not that I have smoking gun evidence, I'm not making accusations, but my question is this. Are we to believe that corporations, these super billionaire corporations, are just being stupidly giving all this favor and money to Democrats and not getting anything in return?
Was started way before I was in the legislature. Second of all, the top priority for BIW was to privatize worker comp, and I vigorously fought against it and defeated them on every step of the way, in the legislature and also at the ballot box. If you track where their campaign contributions are, you'll find we haven't taken any money from BIW for years. You track where their money is going to. You track where their money is going to. That's going to the House and going to caucus. And so the other thing is that in terms of the rebate or the problem with the $220 million, yeah, that was a very serious concern. It was caused by a coding error within the Department of Labor and Industries. They had misassigned what the actual allocation should have been. It was a terrible mistake, and that was investigated. You don't think it was serious, but it clearly needed to stop, and it was done through a lot of things. First of all, the retro program itself was a problem, and second of all, the way that the government administered it was wrong. They had made mistakes on the coding errors among the computers, which then allowed BIW to have a lot more money, which then they used for political purposes. That was wrong, and we fought that.
I think it's time for the candidates to ask a question of each other. to ask a question, 3 minutes.
Okay. I think that,
But don't make it a long speech question.
yeah. In fact, I was going to say that I think I've already asked the questions. The questions are, why, if after decades of Democratic Party leadership, we are seeing the impoverishment of people in this state, we are seeing the extreme overburden of taxation on people in this state, and we're seeing that every 4 years, Speaker Chopp famously says that this is not a good year for progressive tax, this is not a good year for progressive tax. Why should we believe that next year is going to be the magic year? What is it that they're going to do differently? Are they going to fight corporations openly like us? Are they going to join us in that struggle? Are they going to be out on the streets? And in terms of the retro scandal, I want to say that yes, that whole rebate program started before Speaker Chopp came into office, but that does not excuse the people who are in office for over a decade from actually fighting it. And Speaker Chopp has still not answered the question, where did that money go? Is that money going to come back? And this is not a personal allegation. This is taxpayer money that went into a corporate black hole. We have every right to ask this question.
You get an extra minute for that one question.
Well, I'm not sure where to start. In terms of all these issues, we've been there fighting on the front lines to fight against corporate interests on a number of fronts, including VIW on the worker comp thing. Worker comp, by the way, is workers' compensation. It provides compensation if you're injured on the job. And we work with labor unions all the time to make sure we protect that program because it's the best in the nation. It is best in large part because it has the best benefits in the nation for injured workers, but it also is fundamentally funded in the correct way. It's primarily funded through a tax on businesses. And we work very hard to work with folks. And that's part of the reason why I've been endorsed by all the labor unions that you can think of, whether it's Labor Council, the Machinist Union, the Teamsters, the Amalgamated Transit Workers Union, the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, etc., because we work together with the representatives of the working class to do the right thing for working families.
1 minute?
Sure. Is this a closing statement or just response?
No, this is still back to forth.
Okay. Well, in terms of, I'll stick to one main point. In terms of the Democrats and Speaker Chopp saying that they are fighting on the front lines, again, I would ask them to define what the front lines are. And I will also, use Referendum 74 as an example. I mean, yes, we totally support marriage equality. We have been among the activists who have been out on the streets putting pressure on Olympia in order to make those changes. And the question is, why was it that these last 2 years were the magic years? Governor Gregoire said that the time has come. It's time to make marriage equality possible. She's been the governor for 7 years. Why in all those 7 years she didn't think the time had come? And Speaker Chopp has been the speaker for 10 years. Why did the time come? I'll tell you why the time came. The time came because people were out on the streets demanding. And the Democrats in the state of Washington often talk about repealing DOMA at the state level. They never mentioned that DOMA at the federal level was instituted by their very own Bill Clinton. And as far as the labor support for Democrats is concerned, I think that is the most important point we should make, is that, yes, labor leadership is tied at the hip to the Democrats, and look what has happened. Labor has gotten battered year after year, decade after decade, and if Speaker Chopp would like to hear what the rank and file of the labor movement thinks about supporting the Democrats, I'll invite you to talk to someone like Ted Burdone, who is sitting right here. He's a member of the Seattle Education Association, and he can tell you how his views are not being represented.
We talk about marriage equality. We chose to work with the leaders in the gay and lesbian community. We came up with a strategy to make sure that we step-by-step achieve civil rights. First, by banning discrimination, which was not easy because when the Republicans were in charge, they did a lot of hateful things in the legislature against gays and lesbians. But we fought back. We passed civil rights legislation, we passed anti-bullying legislation, anti-hate crime legislation, also civil unions, and then finally marriage equality and repeal of DOMA. We worked with the leaders of the gay and lesbian community to do that strategy, and it was successful. And for God's sake, you got to be out there right now helping pass this referendum, because it is very close out there. The rest of the state is not like the 43rd district. You had an inkling of that by the guy who was representing the opposition on gay marriage. That's what a lot of the rest of the state is about, folks. So we've got to fight across the state, and we've got to get the vote out for representing for in this state. Then in terms of collective bargaining and things like that, in terms of workers' rights, I have led the greatest expansion of collective bargaining rights in this state for working families, working people, for 50 to 60 years. Hear me out. We passed out of the legislature collective bargaining rights for state employees, for teaching and research assistants at the University of Washington, for home care workers. Where did the first home care worker got unionized? It was across the street in my agency. We had 150 home care workers. I brought in the union, at that time it was OPEIU, that's Office of Professional Employees International Union, which I'm still a proud member of. We had those folks represented so that they got a better deal, both a better wage, and then also training, and benefits, and a lot of other things. And we were successful. So that 150 first group of people that I organized as a union organizer working with the union now has grown to the second largest union in the state with 42,000 unionized home care workers. That's real delivery on real results. Thank you.
So you never asked this question. Then it's time for closing statements.
Can I ask you a question?
If it's very short.
Sure. There's a consortium, there's a group of corporations that want to build North America's largest coal export terminal in this state. They want to take coal from Wyoming and Montana, put it on coal trains through Seattle, up through Bellingham, and then ship it to China through this coal port they want to build. And that means that the SoDo area around the south of downtown is going to be tied up with traffic, 1.5 mile long trains for approximately once an hour for 10 minutes an hour. So my question is, what are you doing to speak out against this thing? It's gonna lead to
I'm gonna reformulate the question. What do you propose that we do, and it's for both the candidate, because you're asking it as if it's to only the incumbent. What do you propose to do about coal transport through Washington? I'll give you each a minute.
And it's coal's a leading contributor to global warming.
Yes.
Not only for
You don't need a
traffic.
statement.
So what are you doing? You should be speaking out.
The issue of the coal trains is a very important issue. We've got labor unions who strongly want those coal trains for a variety of reasons, mainly because they want jobs. We have a lot of environmental leaders, and by the way, I've been endorsed by the Sierra Club and the Conservation Voters, and a whole bunch and Bicycle Club, because of my record on environmental concerns. So I've been in concert with the environmentalists to try to figure out what can be done at the state level. When you actually delve into the issue, it mainly becomes an issue at the federal level with the Corps of Engineers about requiring what's called a programmatic EIS, which I support, which is what the tribes of this state have asked for and others have asked for. I personally support that because if you've done an environmental impact statement, it's good to have a programmatic thing where you look at the cumulative impact of these things over time. And I've done that on going from housing demolition and a whole bunch of other issues over the years. So the other thing about coal, on a personal level, is my parents grew up in Roslyn. It was a coal mining town. My dad had to go to work at age 12 at the coal mine. His job, as the coal came out of the shaft, was to get the rocks and to take them out so that the coal would go into the coal trains, okay? This is a personal issue to me. That's how I got my belief in helping working people, is because of my experience with my parents on the picket lines when they actually first met in Roslyn on the picket line. My mother was tear gassed by the state patrol, okay? That's why I'm a strong union supporter, because I believe in collective bargaining rights and the rights of working people stand up for themselves. And I just have very little sympathy for the coal companies is what I'm getting to, all right? And I think you ought to keep in mind my own personal history when I talk about the passion in my life for these issues.
I wanted to say that, perhaps our esteemed opponent and the Democratic Party may have passion. I mean, that's not the issue. We don't want to talk about what's in people's minds because nobody knows what's in people's minds. Let's talk about actions and outcomes. And I think it is quite an irony that for somebody whose mother was tear gassed by the state patrol, was somebody who was instrumental in calling out the state troopers against labor leaders who were protesting against an anti-labor legislation. I think that is something to think about. I mean, if somebody is trying to live up to that proud labor heritage, then how about fighting for labor, for a change? And in terms of the coal terminal that the questioner asked about, one of the main corporations behind this is the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad Company. Mr. Chopp has received $900 from them, but that's not the main issue. The main issue is that except for a few who are grassroots candidates in this election, everybody else, the Democrats and the Republicans, except for one single Democrat, I think, everybody else is completely silent, either completely silent on the coal terminal issue or openly for the coal terminal. If you look at the Bellingham legislators, the mayor of Bellingham, Kelly Lindbergh, is still in the pockets. Rob Murray, the husband of Patty Murray, has a $500,000 retirement package with SSA Marine, another major company behind the coal terminal. So in reality, in answer to your question, what can you do? What would I do? I think if you look at the protests that have happened against the coal terminal, that have been the only and major force in order to keep a check on that. And unfortunately, of course, keeping a check is not enough. A moratorium is not enough. We have to put a stop to it entirely. And the only way to put a stop to that is to have vigorous and courageous mass movements against it. And as a legislator, that is what I would support.
So 2-minute closing statements. Start with you, Frank.
I've spent my life fighting for the right cause to benefit the people of the state. I got my start at the Fremont Public Association in this neighborhood in a storefront just down the street. Our offices were across the street for many years. We not only used it as a way to fight poverty, but also various social justice efforts like raising the minimum wage and environmental efforts like curbside recycling. Those two things started right there and right there in this neighborhood. It was not easy, but we did it. In many cases, taking to the streets, whether it was getting the volunteers to do the curbside collection, recyclables, or whether it was organizing the petition drive, because that initiative had to get on the ballot. It took a massive effort to get about 350,000 signatures to get the minimum wage on the ballot. Because at that time, before I was in the legislature would never pass and increase the minimum wage. So we took it to the streets, we took it to the people, and we got the job done, and it's the best in the nation. And that's the kind of thing I am inspired by. And also other things, in terms of having the best children's health program in the nation. Over 700,000 kids in this state have health care. And it was largely due to the efforts that we organized with community health clinics and a whole lot of effort, both in the legislature and outside efforts. Because it's important to remember that not everything happens overnight. Would I like it to happen sooner? Would I like to have some of these things done like right now? Yes, I would. But it takes a lot of years of effort to actually get these things done. So if you want to look at something, I brought my brochure, which is 14 examples from people living in this district, fighting these causes, ranging from the community health clinics to the students at the University of Washington, supporting the efforts I put my life into for the last 35 years. So I ask for you. Thank you very much.
I can't help starting by noticing that as we've done many of these candidate forums, I see the rhetoric becoming more and more like ours, more activist oriented, and I think that itself is a demonstration of how activists and ordinary people presenting a challenge can actually shift the parameters and the frame of the debate. And I think consider that very quickly about the coal terminal. Speaker Chopp mentioned the environmental impact statement, the EISs. Let's be clear, folks, this EIS is just a fig leaf to keep away what we need, which is a ban on the coal terminals. The climate change is here to stay. We know what role coal plays. It's very clear. We don't need yet another EIS. It's very clear what the impacts will be, and let's fight against it. And I also wanted to say that, Speaker Chopp personally has been talking about the number of NGO type efforts that he has taken. I personally, as somebody who has deep compassion for the poor, commend any effort that is taken for the poor. But let me make this point. It is because we are living in a system that perpetuates and creates new poverty that the need for NGOs is created in the first place. Why don't we fight for a society where NGOs are not necessary? Because think about it, most of the poor are either children or people who are hardworking. Why do they need charity? They don't need charity, they need their human rights, and that should come about through the system, not through an NGO. And the reality is, for every dollar that an NGO generates for a homeless person or for a starving person, there are 10 other people starving there, and 10 new people tomorrow will be starving because the system perpetuates that whole kind of program. Lastly, I want to say that, I often hear the Democrats in response to my points implying that, we are dreamers, they are getting things done. In reality, what has got things done is what we are talking about, mass movements, activism, and direct action, public action. And it may take years, but the way they are going, it is never going to happen. In fact, we have more poverty, not less, more unemployment, not less, more homelessness, not less, less money for education, not more, less money for healthcare, not more, and let's be clear, it's time for single-payer healthcare.